He whispered to her during her first time, "I'll go slow," and those words changed everything. No one imagined that night would reveal the true meaning of love. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because what happened next will touch your heart in the most unexpected way. Emily's hands trembled as she held the silver tray with crystal wine glasses. The weight wasn't excessive, but the responsibility she carried on her shoulders, not to ruin her first night as a temporary server at the most prestigious winery in Napa Valley, made every muscle in her body tense like the strings of a guitar tuned to its limit. Autumn had arrived in California's wine country, with its mantle of ochre and golden colors. The leaves of the grapevines were tinged with crimson, and the air carried that unmistakable aroma of ripe grapes in full maturation, mixed with the sweet perfume of jasmine emanating from the interior garden. It was an olfactory symphony that Emily had known since birth, but that night it seemed to intensify, as if the very earth wanted to remind her of where she came from. The main hall of Silverbrook Estate gleamed under the golden light of enormous wrought-iron chandeliers. Hand-painted Italian tiles from the 19th century decorated the walls with geometric patterns in blue and white tones, telling silent stories of artisans who had dedicated their lives to the perfection of each stroke. Burgundy velvet curtains framed windows that offered privileged views toward the Mayacamas Mountains, whose peaks were beginning to be tinged with the first orange tones of twilight. A guitarist, seated discreetly in a corner, plucked melancholic chords from his instrument. The notes floated through the atmosphere like sighs of ancient lovers, enveloping everything in an atmosphere of timeless elegance. Emily moved carefully among the guests, aware that each one of them was worth more than her family would earn in a lifetime. She was 21 years old, with the face of someone who had worked under the sun from an early age. Her honey-colored eyes, an inheritance from her Scotch-Irish grandmother, shone with a mixture of determination and vulnerability that few stopped to observe. Her dark brown hair, pulled back in a tight bun, according to the manager's instructions, left exposed a slender neck where a racing pulse beat. Her grandmother Margaret always said that Emily carried in her gaze the same sweetness that dwelt in her heart. "You're like young wine girl," she would repeat while they kneaded bread in the family home's kitchen. "You don't yet know everything you can become, but you already have the essence of something extraordinary." That night, however, Emily didn't feel extraordinary. She felt small, insignificant, an intruder in a world that didn't belong to her. She was studying nursing at the University of California, Davis, combining classes with exhausting shifts at the university hospital and any temporary work that would allow her to help with family expenses. The scholarship covered tuition, but books, transportation, and food required constant sacrifices. Her father had died when she was 12, leaving her mother with a small parcel of vineyards that barely produced enough to survive. Grandmother Margaret had then moved into the family home, bringing with her her ancestral wisdom and her arthritic hands that still insisted on preparing the best pot roast in the entire county. Emily moved toward the center of the hall, where a group of suited men conversed animatedly about investments and commercial expansions. Words like mergers, acquisition, and profitability floated in the air, foreign to her daily vocabulary of vital signs, palliative care, and night shifts. It was then that her left foot caught on the edge of the Persian rug that decorated the marble floor. The world seemed to stop. The tray tilted dangerously, the glasses tinkled like warning bells, and Emily felt the air leave her lungs. In a fraction of a second, she visualized the disaster. The crystal shattering against the floor, the red wine splashing the immaculate suits of the guests, her immediate dismissal and the shame she would carry forever. But the disaster didn't come. A firm hand caught her elbow with surprising delicacy, stabilizing her just in time. The touch was as soft as the velvet of the curtains that framed the antique windows, but secure enough to transmit an instant calm to her. Emily looked up and found herself with eyes the color of dark chocolate, deep as the underground cellars where the best wines of the region aged. The man holding her would be in his mid-30s, with black hair slightly gray at the temples and a jawline that seemed sculpted by a Renaissance artist. He wore a dark gray suit of impeccable cut, but there was something in his expression that contradicted the formality of his attire, an unexpected warmth, almost tender. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice deep and melodious like the continuo bass of a Baroque piece. Emily felt her face burn. The blush rose from her neck to her cheeks with the speed of a wildfire. "Yes, I'm so sorry, sir. Please forgive me. It was an unforgivable mistake." The words came out rushed, mixing with the shame that threatened to suffocate her. She tried to make a small apologetic bow, but he didn't release her arm. "You have nothing to apologize for," he responded, with a smile that softened the angles of his face. "That rug has been setting traps for the unwary for decades. It's almost a tradition of the house." Around them, the other guests had returned to their conversations, oblivious to the small drama that had just unfolded. But the man with chocolate eyes continued looking at her with an attention that made her feel simultaneously exposed and protected. "Allow me," he said, taking the tray from her trembling hands. "I think you need a moment to recover." Before Emily could protest, he made a discreet signal to another server to take charge of the glasses. Then, with an almost imperceptible gesture, he guided her to the interior courtyard of the estate, away from curious looks and the incessant murmur of the party. The courtyard was an oasis of serenity. A ceramic fountain decorated the center, surrounded by jasmine that perfumed the night air with its intoxicating fragrance. Stars were beginning to emerge in the indigo sky, and the temperature had dropped enough to make contact with the breeze pleasant. "Breathe," he indicated, pointing to a stone bench beside the fountain. "The world doesn't end because of a stumble." Emily obeyed, more from inertia than from her own will. She sat on the edge of the bench, hands intertwined on her lap, unable to lift her gaze from the cobblestone floor. "I shouldn't be here," she murmured. "I need to get back to work. Work can wait 5 minutes." "You don't understand. I need this job. If they fire me—" "No one is going to fire you." The certainty in his voice made her finally raise her eyes. He had sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance, but close enough for her to perceive the aroma of his cologne, notes of cedarwood and bergamot. "How can you be so sure?" Emily asked. He smiled again, and she noticed he had a dimple in his right cheek that appeared only when the smile was genuine. "Because this winery is mine." The words took a moment to penetrate the fog of nervousness that enveloped Emily's brain. When she finally understood their meaning, she felt the ground open beneath her feet. You're James Harrington?" "Guilty," he admitted, extending his hand in a formal gesture that contrasted with the informality of the situation. "Although I prefer simply James, if you don't mind." Emily shook his hand clumsily, aware that hers was cold and slightly damp from nerves. His grip was firm but gentle, as if he knew exactly the pressure necessary to transmit confidence without intimidating. "Emily," she introduced herself. "Emily Watson. And I'm truly sorry for what? For demonstrating that you're human." James shook his head, amused. "Believe me, after an hour listening to those men talk about profit margins, a little humanity was exactly what I needed." For the first time all night, Emily felt the tension leave her shoulders. There was something in the way he spoke, in the manner he looked at her without judging, that made her feel less like an employee and more like an equal. "May I ask you something?" said James. "Sure. What is a young woman who is clearly not comfortable serving glasses doing working at a party like this?" Emily hesitated for an instant. The question was direct, but there was no malice in it, only genuine curiosity. "I'm studying nursing," she explained. "This is just a temporary job to pay the bills," he completed, nodding. "I understand. Do you? More than you imagine?" James leaned back against the bench's backrest, his gaze lost in the stars that dotted the sky above their heads. "When I was 20, I worked as a receptionist at a rundown hotel on the outskirts of Oakland. 12-hour shifts, impossible clients, a boss who thought shouting was a form of motivation, all to be able to pay for my first semester at business school." Emily looked at him with skepticism. The man before her owned one of the most successful winery chains in California. Imagining him scrubbing floors or enduring insults seemed as implausible as imagining a king begging in the streets. "You don't believe me," James observed, with a smile that suggested he was accustomed to that reaction. "It's hard to imagine," she admitted. "Most valuable things are." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. The murmur of the fountain filled the space between them, and the aroma of jasmine intensified with the night breeze. In the distance, the guitarist had changed to a more upbeat melody, and the laughter of the guests arrived muffled by the stone walls. Emily didn't know how long they remained like that, sitting on that stone bench while the night advanced, and the stars completed their silent dance above their heads. They talked about everything and nothing, about the vineyards she had known since childhood, about the wineries he had built brick by brick, about abandoned dreams and hopes that refused to die. When the horizon began to tinge with pink tones, announcing a dawn that neither had anticipated, Emily realized she had completely forgotten her work, her shame, and her place in the world. The only thing that existed was that conversation, that man with chocolate eyes who looked at her as if she were the most interesting person he had met in years, and the inexplicable certainty that something fundamental had changed in the universe. Something that had no name yet, but that pulsed with the force of things that are destined to be. The following weeks passed with a strange duality for Emily. On one hand, her routine continued with the same intensity as always: theoretical classes at the university, hospital practices, nights of study with eyes reddened from lack of sleep. On the other hand, something had changed in a subtle but undeniable way. Like when the wind changes direction and you know a storm is approaching, although the sky remains clear. James appeared for the first time at the coffee shop next to Main Street on a rainy Tuesday in November. Emily was seated at her usual table, by the window that overlooked the farmers' market stalls, with a latte that had gone cold an hour ago and a pathology textbook open to the chapter on cardiovascular diseases. "Is this seat taken?" The voice made her look up with a start. James was standing beside her table, holding a black umbrella that dripped onto the worn tile floor. He dressed more casually than at the party, dark jeans and a burgundy turtleneck sweater that brought out the olive tone of his skin. "Mr. Harrington," Emily stammered, making a move to stand up. "James," he corrected, with that smile that was already familiar to her. "And please, don't get up. I was just passing by and—" "Passing by?" The question came out before she could contain it. Maggie's coffee house was tucked away in a narrow alley in Napa's historic downtown, far from the tourist routes and elegant establishments that someone like him would frequent. James had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "Okay, you caught me. I asked at the winery where I could find you." "Why?" "Because I wanted to return this." He took from the inner pocket of his jacket a small object that Emily recognized instantly, the silver brooch in the shape of a grape cluster that her grandmother had lent her for the night of the party. She had lost it at some point during their conversation in the courtyard and had spent days lamenting the carelessness. "I found it by the fountain," James explained. "I figured it was important to you." Emily took the brooch with trembling fingers. It was an antique piece, inherited from generation to generation, that represented her family's unbreakable bond with the land and the vines. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice strangled by emotion. "You don't know what this means to me. I think I can imagine." James sat across from her without asking permission, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Maggie, the owner of the coffee shop, a robust 60-year-old woman who had known Emily since she was a child, approached with poorly disguised curiosity. "What'll it be for you, sir?" "An espresso, please, and another latte for the young lady." "That's not necessary," Emily began. "I insist. Yours must be cold by now." Maggie exchanged a knowing look with Emily before withdrawing to prepare the orders. In her eyes shone that "you'll tell me later" expression that women from small towns mastered to perfection. "Do you always study here?" James asked, glancing at the book open on the table. "It's quiet, and Maggie lets me stay for hours without pressuring me to order more." "Sounds like a good arrangement." "It is." The silence that followed was different from that of the night in the courtyard, more charged, more self-aware. Emily felt the weight of James's gaze on her as something almost physical, a presence that altered the air around her. "May I ask you a question?" he said finally. "You already asked one the other night." "True. May I ask another?" Emily closed the pathology book, accepting that study would have to wait. "Go ahead." "Why nursing?" The question caught her by surprise. Most people assumed she had chosen the career by default, for lack of better options, for the job stability it promised. No one bothered to ask the real reason. "My father," she responded, surprising herself with the honesty of her answer. "He died when I was 12, a massive heart attack while working in the vineyards. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late." "I'm sorry." "Thank you." But I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry. I'm telling you because that experience taught me something important. In life's most difficult moments, the people who care for us make all the difference. The nurses who attended my father, those who later cared for my mother when she fell into depression, they were angels disguised in white uniforms. James listened to her with an attention she wasn't accustomed to receiving. He didn't look at his watch, didn't check his phone, didn't seem to be waiting for his turn to speak. He simply listened, as if her words were the most important sound in the universe. "I want to be that angel for someone," Emily continued. "I want to be there in the moment when everything seems to crumble and offer a hand, a word of comfort, a little hope. It's a beautiful dream. It's more than a dream. It's a promise I made to myself at my father's grave." Maggie returned with the coffees, interrupting the moment with her usual pragmatism. "Here you go. And Emily, honey, your grandmother called asking if you're coming to dinner tonight. Says she's made your favorite dish. Tell her yes, thanks." When Maggie walked away, James looked at her with renewed curiosity. "Your grandmother? She lives with me." "Well, technically I live with her. It's a long story. I like long stories." And so, between sips of coffee and glances that said more than words, Emily told him. She spoke of the stone house in the countryside, of the vineyards that had belonged to her family for generations, of Grandmother Margaret and her old sayings, of recipes passed from mother to daughter like priceless treasures. James, in turn, told her about his own family, of parents who had worked their entire lives to build a small wine empire and who now enjoyed their retirement in Santa Barbara, of an older sister named Catherine, who managed the family business's public relations with an iron fist, of the constant weight of expectations and the loneliness that accompanied success. "People see the wineries, the properties, the bank accounts," he confessed, turning the cup between his hands. "But nobody sees the sleepless nights wondering if I made the right decision, if I'm living up to my parents' legacy, if I'll ever find someone who sees me beyond all that." "I see you," Emily said, and the words came out before she could think them. James raised his gaze, and in his eyes she saw something she recognized instantly, the same fear of not being enough that she carried in her own heart. That was the first of many encounters. James began appearing at the coffee shop with almost predictable regularity, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturday mornings. He always brought something, a rare book about medical history he'd found in an antique bookstore in San Francisco, a thermos with hot chocolate prepared by the chef from one of his wineries, wildflowers picked from the fields surrounding the estate. Emily, for her part, taught him to appreciate the small things money couldn't buy. She took him to her grandmother's house to try authentic American pot roast, slow-cooked for hours, until the meat fell apart in your mouth. She dragged him to hear the bells of the old Presbyterian church at sunset, when the sun painted the ancient stones in golden tones. She showed him the simple pleasure of walking in the autumn rain, feeling the cold drops on your skin while the world smelled of wet earth and renewed promises. "I'd never done this before," he admitted one afternoon, as they walked through downtown Napa with soaked shoes and cheeks reddened by the cold. "Done what?" "Walk. Walk without a destination, without a meeting waiting for me at the end of the journey, without checking my watch every 5 minutes. It's called living, James." "Then I think I'd never really lived before." She looked at him sideways, studying his profile against the grey sky. There was something different about him when they were together, a relaxation in his features that suggested that, for the first time in a long while, he was allowing himself simply to exist. "May I ask you something?" Emily said. "Always." "Why me?" James stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, ignoring the passers-by who had to go around them to continue on their way. "What do you mean?" "This. Us. You could be with any woman in the world, actresses, models, heiresses to fortunes that would make yours seem insignificant. Why waste time with a nursing student who can't even buy you a decent cup of coffee?" The question had been eating at Emily for weeks. Every night as she tried to fall asleep in her small room in the family home, doubts assailed her. What could someone like James Harrington see in someone like her? James took her hands in his. They were cold from the rain, but the contact sent a wave of warmth through her entire body. "Because you see me," he responded, repeating the words she had spoken weeks ago. "You don't see the businessman, or the heir, or the name in the business journals. You see James, just James, and you have no idea how rare and valuable that is." Emily felt tears threatening to overflow. She swallowed them with the practice of someone who had learned to be strong when the world expected her to crumble. "I'm afraid," she confessed. "Of what?" "That one day you'll wake up and realize this was a mistake, that you'll see who I really am, a girl from the countryside with no money, no connections, nothing to offer you, and decide I'm not worth it." James pulled her to him, wrapping her in an embrace that smelled of rain and cedar. She felt the beat of his heart against her cheek, firm and steady like a drum marking the rhythm of something new. "Emily Watson," he whispered against her hair, "you're the most valuable person I've met in my life, and if anyone here isn't worth it, it's me." They remained like that, embraced under the November rain while the world kept turning around them, and the first seeds of a true love took root in the fertile soil of two lonely hearts. The first sign that not everything would be so simple came in the form of a phone call at 3 in the morning. Emily was asleep in her room, exhausted after a 12-hour shift at the hospital, when the sound of her cell phone violently tore her from a dream she would no longer remember. She fumbled in the dark until she found the device, and the bright screen showed her an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered, her voice hoarse from sleep. "Emily Watson." It was a female voice, cold as steel, with an accent that betrayed education at the best private schools in Boston. "Yes, this is she. Who's calling?" "Catherine Harrington, James's sister." The name was like a bucket of ice water. Emily sat up in bed, her heart racing. "Did something happen? Is James okay?" "My brother is perfectly fine. What's not so fine is his reputation, which you're destroying with each passing day." The coldness in Catherine's voice left no room for nuance. It was the tone of someone accustomed to giving orders and expecting immediate obedience. "I don't understand what you're talking about," Emily responded, trying to maintain calm. "Oh, I think you understand perfectly. James is a powerful man, and powerful men attract a certain type of woman. Women who see an opportunity to climb socially, to get a lifestyle they could never achieve on their own merits. That's not—" "Let me finish. I've investigated your background, Emily. I know where you come from, who your family is, how much you owe the bank for the mortgage on that parcel of vineyards that barely produces enough to pay the bills. I know your mother works cleaning other people's houses, and that your grandmother lives on a miserable pension." Each word was a dagger plunged into Emily's heart. Not because of its content, everything was true, but because of the way Catherine spat it out, as if they were unforgivable crimes. "My background isn't a secret," Emily responded, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. "James knows everything. James is blinded. He's a smart man in business, but an idiot when it comes to women, and you're taking advantage of that weakness. Listen to me carefully, Miss Harrington. I have no interest in your brother's money. I haven't asked for anything, I don't expect anything, and I certainly don't need your approval to— To what? To keep playing the perfect girlfriend until you get a ring on your finger and access to the family accounts?" Emily gripped the phone so hard that her knuckles turned white. "This conversation is over." "No, dear, it's barely begun. I'm warning you once. Stay away from my brother. Do it the easy way, or I guarantee you'll do it the hard way. And believe me when I say my methods aren't as civilized as a phone call at midnight." The line went dead before Emily could respond. She sat in the darkness of her room, the phone still pressed against her chest, feeling how the world she had begun to build was swaying on its foundations. She didn't tell James anything. She told herself it was to protect him, to avoid a family conflict that would only make things worse. But deep down she knew it was also pride, that stubbornness inherited from generations of American women who had learned to carry their own crosses in silence. The following weeks, Catherine fulfilled her threat in more subtle but equally painful ways. Rumors began circulating in San Francisco's social circles that Emily was a gold digger, that she had seduced James with a country girl's cunning tricks, that her family had shady debts they hoped to settle with the Harrington fortune. Emily learned of these rumors through casual comments, sidelong glances at the few events James invited her to, uncomfortable silences that settled when she entered a room. It was like walking through a minefield where each step could mean an explosion. "Are you okay?" James asked one night, as they dined at a restaurant in Carmel he had insisted on taking her to. "You seem distant." "I'm just tired. The hospital shifts have been brutal." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Emily had learned to walk that grey line between honesty and protection, saying enough not to lie but hiding what was necessary not to worry him. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" "I know." James extended his hand across the table, taking hers with the tenderness that characterized him. "I love you, Emily. Whatever's happening, I want you to know I'm on your side. Always." The words should have comforted her. Instead, they only intensified the knot of anguish she'd been carrying in her stomach since Catherine's call. How long could she maintain this facade? How long before the pressure broke her, or James discovered the shadows that loomed over them? The answer came sooner than she expected. The Legion of Honor gleamed under the light of 1,000 candles that December night. The annual charity gala benefiting children's foundations brought together the cream of San Francisco society. Businessmen, politicians, artists, aristocrats, who still held titles, though no longer the power of yesteryear. Emily had tried to decline the invitation with every excuse she could think of. Final exams, hospital shifts, her grandmother's health. But James had insisted with a determination that admitted no replies. "I want you by my side," he had told her. "I want the world to know what you mean to me." Now as she walked through the halls of the palace on James's arm, Emily felt like a disguised imposter. The dress she wore, a gift from him that she had accepted only after a long discussion, was navy blue silk with hand-embroidered details. Beautiful, expensive, completely out of place on her country girl's body. "You look stunning," James whispered in her ear, as if he could read her thoughts. "I'm terrified," she responded with a tense smile. "You have nothing to fear. I'm with you." But not even he could protect her from what was to come. Catherine Harrington made her triumphant entrance an hour after they arrived. She wore a blood-red dress that contrasted dramatically with her pale skin, and her black hair pulled back in an impeccable bun. Beside her walked an older man Emily vaguely recognized from the business pages of newspapers, the president of some important bank, whose name she couldn't remember. "James, darling," Catherine greeted, kissing her brother on both cheeks with an affection Emily knew was feigned. "So good to see you, and this must be Emily." The way she pronounced her name, as if it were an unpleasant word she had to spit out, made Emily visibly tense. "Pleasure to finally meet you," she responded, extending her hand. Catherine shook it briefly, barely a brush of cold fingers before releasing it. "Likewise. I've heard so much about you. I hope good things. I hope you won't be disappointed." James frowned at the exchange, clearly perceiving the undercurrent of tension running between the two women. "Catherine, can we talk for a moment? Privately?" "Of course. But later, little brother. I have to give a brief speech before they serve dinner." "You know, social obligations." With a final meaningful look at Emily, Catherine walked away toward the podium they had set up in the center of the main hall. James followed her with his eyes, his brow increasingly furrowed. "What was that?" he asked. "Nothing," Emily lied, "just nerves." But it wasn't nothing, and they both knew it. Catherine's speech began like all charity gala speeches. Thanks to sponsors, statistics about benefited children, appeals to the generosity of those present. Emily began to relax, thinking perhaps she had worried in vain. Then Catherine changed her tone. "In a world where so many struggle to achieve the basics," she said, her voice amplified by the microphones, "it's comforting to see so many people genuinely committed to helping others. People whose generosity springs from the heart, not from calculated self-interest." She made a dramatic pause, and Emily felt her stomach shrink. Unfortunately, not everyone around us shares that purity of intentions. Some see in acts of charity an opportunity to advance socially, to climb positions they could never reach on their own merit. Some confuse kindness with naivety and take advantage of the good faith of those who open the doors to worlds where they don't belong. A murmur ran through the hall. Gazes began turning toward where Emily stood, as if everyone knew exactly who Catherine was referring to. "It's our duty," Catherine continued, looking directly at where her brother stood, "to protect our own from those influences that only seek personal gain. To protect them even from themselves, when their good heart blinds them to the true intentions of those around them." Emily felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She clenched her fists at the sides of her silk dress, that dress that suddenly seemed like proof of everything Catherine accused her of being. Beside her she felt James tense like a bow about to release. "Emily," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I had no idea." "It doesn't matter," she responded, her voice surprisingly firm. "Let's go." She began to turn, ready to flee from that place where every gaze was a judgment and every whisper a condemnation. But before she could take a step, James did something no one expected. He walked toward the podium. Catherine saw him approach, and her expression of triumph wavered for the first time. James climbed the steps with the elegance of a predator, took the microphone from his sister's hands without asking permission, and turned toward the hall full of expectant faces. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice resonating with an authority that silenced even the last murmur. "I apologize for the interruption, but I think my sister forgot to mention something important in her speech." Catherine tried to recover the microphone, but he dodged her with a fluid movement. "She spoke about protecting our own from harmful influences, about caring for those we love when they can't see clearly. I agree with that principle, but I think she's applying it to the wrong person." An absolute silence took hold of the hall. Not even the glasses clinked. "Emily Watson," James continued, searching for her with his gaze among the crowd, "is the most honest, brave, and genuine woman I've met in my life. She has no money, it's true. She has no powerful connections or a last name that opens doors. What she has is something much more valuable, a heart that knows nothing of calculations or self-interest, that gives without expecting anything in return, that has taught me more about true wealth in a few months than I learned in 36 years of privileged life." Emily felt that the tears, the same ones she had fought to contain, now rolled freely down her cheeks, but they were no longer tears of shame. "If anyone in this hall has a problem with my choice of partner," James swept the place with a defiant gaze, "you're within your rights to keep your opinion to yourself or express it directly to me. What I will not tolerate, ever, is for the woman I love to be humiliated in public for the simple crime of not having been born with a silver spoon in her mouth." The silence broke into applause, first timid from a few hands, but growing until it became an ovation that rumbled between the century-old walls of the palace. Emily saw how several faces that had previously looked at her with contempt now directed smiles of admiration at her. Catherine, for her part, had lost all colour from her face. She descended from the podium without looking at anyone and disappeared into the crowd, her red figure swallowed by the sea of suits and evening gowns. James descended from the podium and walked directly to Emily. He took her hands, ignoring the curious looks and camera flashes from cell phones. "Forgive me," he whispered. "I should have done this a long time ago." "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did. I had to defend what's true, what's right, what's worth protecting." He kissed her then, there, in front of 200 witnesses who would immortalize the moment in photographs and videos that would circulate for days on social media. A kiss that tasted of victory, of promises, of everything neither had had the courage to name until then. And in that instant, Emily knew that, whatever happened, she would no longer have to face the shadows alone. The days following the gala were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. James's public defense had changed the rules of the game, but it hadn't eliminated the challenges that awaited them. Catherine disappeared from her brother's life, taking refuge in her San Francisco apartment and rejecting all calls. The media, eager for scandals among the elite, had turned Emily and James's story into the topic of the moment. Headlines oscillated between the romantic and the cruel. The Harrington heir chooses love over lineage. The Californian Cinderella who won the wine prince. True love or perfect strategy. Emily tried to ignore the media noise, but it was impossible to escape completely. Her colleagues at the hospital gave her curious looks. Her professors asked veiled questions. And on more than one occasion, she had found photographers stationed outside her grandmother's house, waiting to capture an image of the famous Emily Watson. "This has to stop," she said one night, sitting in the family home's kitchen while grandmother Margaret prepared chamomile tea. "What, dear? The photographers or the feelings?" Emily looked at her grandmother with surprise. The elderly woman had an unsettling ability to read between the lines. "I don't know, maybe both." Margaret sat across from her, her arthritic hands wrapping around the steaming cup. At 78 years old, she bore the marks of time in every wrinkle of her face, but her eyes still shone with the same keenness as always. "Do you love him?" she asked bluntly. "Yes." "And does he love you?" "He says he does." And do you believe him? Emily was silent for a long moment. The question was simple, but the answer contained layers she was barely beginning to explore. I want to believe him, she finally admitted, but there's a part of me that can't stop thinking that all this is too good to be true. That at some point he'll realize he made a mistake, that I don't belong in his world, that... Nonsense. Margaret's interruption was so abrupt that Emily blinked in confusion. Excuse me? I said nonsense. You've been spending weeks repeating the same doubts, the same insecurities, like a broken record, and I allowed it because I thought you needed time to process everything that's happening. But that's enough now. Grandma, no. Now you listen to me. Margaret leaned forward, her gaze locking onto her granddaughter's with intensity. I knew that boy before you were born. I knew his parents. I knew his family. And I can tell you with the certainty that years give, that man is not playing with you. Emily opened her mouth to ask, but Margaret raised a hand to silence her. There are things I haven't told you, stories I kept because they didn't seem relevant. But I think the time has come for you to know them. Tomorrow. Tonight you need to rest, and I need to remember the details well. Grandma, what are you talking about? Margaret smiled enigmatically. Patience, girl. The best stories deserve to be told calmly. That night Emily slept poorly. Fragments of the conversation with her grandmother mixed with images from the gala, with Catherine's face full of hatred, with James's lips whispering words of love that still resonated in her heart. When sleep finally overcame her, she dreamed of vineyards stretching to the horizon and two blurred figures walking between the rows of vines, holding hands as if they had been created to find each other. The following day brought a call that would change the course of events. It was James, and his voice sounded different, tenser, more urgent. I need to see you, he said. There's something we need to discuss. They met at Maggie's coffee house, the place that had become their secret refuge. James arrived looking tired, dark circles marked under his dark eyes, his hair slightly disheveled, as if he hadn't had time to fix it. What happened? Emily asked, sitting across from him. I have a business proposal in Chile, an opportunity to expand the winery chain into South America. It's the most important project I've ever undertaken. That sounds amazing. It would be, but it means moving to Santiago for at least 2 years, personally overseeing every stage of construction, establishing relationships with local partners, ensuring everything goes perfectly. Emily felt the ground move beneath her feet. 2 years, at minimum. The silence that followed was dense, charged with everything neither dared to say. I want you to come with me, James finally said, taking her hands across the table. Leave everything here and build a life together in Chile. Emily withdrew her hands as if they burned. Leave everything? My career, my studies, my family? Everything I've fought for during years? We could get you a spot at a university there. Or you could finish your studies remotely and... No. The word came out with more force than intended. James looked at her as if she had slapped him. No? I'm not going to abandon my dreams to follow yours. My career isn't for sale, James. It doesn't matter how much money you have or how much you love me. There are things that aren't negotiable. He leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair with a frustrated gesture. I'm not asking you to abandon anything. I'm asking you to consider other options, to adapt to your life while you don't give an inch. That's not fair. No, what's not fair is that you put me in this position. Emily felt tears threatening to overflow, but she contained them with fury. Have you ever once considered giving up something for me? Rejecting a business deal, changing your plans, sacrificing something that matters to you. Emily, answer me. James remained silent, and that silence was more eloquent than any word. That's what I thought, she said, standing from the table. When you have the answer to that question, call me. Until then, I think we need time to think. She left the coffee shop without looking back, tears finally released running down her cheeks while the June cold bit at her skin. Behind her, James remained motionless, trapped between the empire he had built and the love that threatened to tear it down. It was the first time they had parted without saying goodbye, and the emptiness that absence left was more painful than any hurtful word. Grandmother Margaret kept her promise that afternoon. While rain beat against the windows and fire crackled in the fireplace, the elderly woman took from an old oak chest a yellowed photo album and a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Sit down, she told Emily. What I'm about to tell you will change how you see many things." Emily obeyed, intrigued and fearful in equal parts. The discussion with James had left her emotionally exhausted, and she wasn't sure she could process more revelations. But something in her grandmother's expression told her this was important, perhaps fundamental. In 1976, Margaret began, opening the album to a page where a young couple appeared, posing in front of a stone winery. "I was 30 years old, and your grandfather Robert had just died in a tractor accident. I was left alone, pregnant with your mother, without money, and with a parcel of vineyards that the banks wanted to foreclose." Emily knew this part of the story. It was the foundational trauma of her family, the tragedy that had marked generations. "What you don't know," Margaret continued, "is who saved me from losing everything." She pointed to the couple in the photograph. The man was tall, with aristocratic features and dark hair. The woman, petite and blonde, smiled with the carefree joy of youth. "These are William and Elizabeth Harrington, James's parents." Emily felt her heart skip a beat. "What? I met them at the Harvest Festival in '74. Elizabeth and I were the same age, and we became friends almost instantly. She came from a wealthy family in San Francisco, but she didn't have an ounce of arrogance. We'd spend afternoons talking about dreams, about children who didn't yet exist, about the life we wanted to build." Margaret turned several pages of the album, showing photographs of two young couples sharing meals, celebrations, moments of happiness captured on paper. "When Robert died," the elderly woman's voice trembled slightly, "I was devastated. Creditors knocked on my door every day, and I didn't have the strength even to get out of bed. That's when William appeared with a proposal." "What proposal?" "He paid all my debts, every cent we owed the bank, the suppliers, the loan sharks, and not as charity, but as a loan between friends, without interest, without deadlines, without guarantees." Emily looked at her grandmother without being able to believe what she was hearing. "Why didn't you ever tell me this?" "Because after that, life took us down different paths. William and Elizabeth moved to San Francisco to expand their wine business. I stayed here, raising your mother, working the land. We lost contact, as happens so often when distance and responsibilities intervene." Margaret took a letter from the bundle and handed it to Emily. "But they never forgot. Every Christmas, for years, I received a letter from Elizabeth asking about us. And I responded, telling her about your mother, about you when you were born, about small victories and great difficulties." Emily read the letter with trembling hands. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, full of affectionate words and sincere questions about a family that apparently the Harringtons considered part of their own. "The last letter arrived 15 years ago," Margaret continued. "Elizabeth told me that William was ill, and that they had decided to retire to Santa Barbara to enjoy the time they had left together. She said that their son James would take over the business, and that she hoped that someday, somehow, our paths would cross again. Grandma, when you told me you'd met James at the winery, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. The universe has strange ways of closing circles, Emily, and I think this circle was destined to close through you two." Emily let the letter fall onto her lap, overwhelmed by the weight of the revelation. "Why didn't you tell me before? Why did you let me suffer thinking I didn't belong in his world?" "Because you needed to discover it for yourself. If I had told you about the connection between our families from the beginning, you would have doubted everything, his feelings, yours, whether what you felt was real or simply the fulfillment of an old debt. But there are no buts, girl. What you feel for that man is yours. What he feels for you is his. The history that connects you is just the frame, not the picture." Emily got up from the sofa and walked to the window. The rain had let up, leaving the sky washed with a pearl grey that promised clarity. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "I said horrible things. I accused him of not sacrificing anything for me when I didn't even give him a chance to explain. Mistakes can be corrected, dear. What can't be corrected is silence." Margaret approached her granddaughter and took her face in her hands as she did when she was little and had nightmares. "That man loves you. I saw it in his eyes when he came looking for you after the party, even though you weren't home. I saw it in the way he talks about you as if you were the sun around which his world orbits. Don't let pride take away something so valuable." Emily hugged her grandmother, clinging to her like an anchor in the middle of the storm. "What do I do now? Only you can decide that. But remember, The deepest roots aren't the ones that bind us, but the ones that allow us to grow. That night, Emily made a decision. She didn't know if it was the right one, but she was tired of letting fear dictate her actions. It was time to face the truth, whatever the cost. 3 days. 72 hours of silence that had weighed like lead on Emily's chest. She had tried to call James several times, but his phone rang repeatedly without answer. The messages she sent went unread, and every minute that passed increased the anguish consuming her. It was Maggie who gave her the information she needed. "Your fellow was here yesterday," the coffee shop owner said while serving her morning coffee. "Asked about you, but I told him I hadn't seen you in days." "How did he look?" "Like hell, if you want me to be honest. Looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Left this for you." She handed her a white envelope with her name written in handwriting Emily already recognized as James's. She opened it with trembling fingers and read, "Emily, I turned down the Chile project. There are things more important than empires, and you taught me to see them. I'm at the winery, waiting. If you want to talk, you know where to find me. If you don't, I'll understand, but I needed you to know that, for the first time in my life, I chose something over business. I chose you. Always yours. James." Emily read the note 3 times, unable to believe what she was seeing. Then she left the coffee untouched, a bill on the table, and ran out toward the bus that would take her to the winery. The trip lasted an eternity. Every curve in the road, every traffic light, every stop seemed designed to torture her. When the bus finally stopped in the small town nearest to Silverbrook Estate, Emily jumped off and started running down the dirt road that wound between the vineyards. The winter landscape enveloped her in brown and grey tones, the bare vines waiting for spring to return them to life. The air smelled of damp earth and promises, and the June sun peeked timidly between torn clouds. The winery appeared before her like a mirage, its golden stone walls, its red tile roofs, its windows reflecting the afternoon light. Emily stopped for a moment to catch her breath, aware that what came next would define the rest of her life. She found him in the interior courtyard, sitting by the ceramic fountain where everything had begun months ago. He wore casual clothes, jeans and a thick wool sweater, and stared at the water as if searching for answers in its constant murmur. "James." He looked up, and Emily saw in his eyes everything she needed to know, the love that hadn't diminished, the fear of having lost her, the hope that ignited seeing her appear. "You came," he whispered. "I read your note." Every word was true. Emily approached slowly, like someone approaching an injured animal, not wanting to startle it. "You turned down Chile? The most important project of your career?" "Yes." "Why?" James stood, shortening the distance between them until they were only an arm's length apart. "Because you asked me if I'd ever sacrificed anything for you, and I realized the answer was no. Never. I always expected you to be the one to adapt, to give in, to give up your dreams to make mine possible. And that's not love, Emily. That's selfishness, disguised as romance. James, I also said horrible things. I accused you of... You were right in every word. You had given me your heart, your trust, your vulnerability, and I wasn't even capable of rejecting a business deal for you. But it was your dream." "No," he corrected, taking her hands in his. "It was my ambition. There's a difference. Dreams are the things that make us happy. Ambitions are what we think will make us happy. You're my dream, Emily. Everything else is just ambition." Tears ran down both their faces now, mixing with smiles they couldn't contain. "My grandmother told me about your parents," Emily said, "about what they did for her years ago." "I know. My parents called me last night to tell me everything. Apparently, my mother always knew who you were. From the moment I mentioned your name, she knew you were Margaret Watson's granddaughter. Why didn't you say anything? For the same reason your grandmother kept silent. We wanted what we felt to be ours, not an extension of past stories." Emily let out a trembling laugh, shaking her head at the complexity of fate. "We're a pair of idiots, aren't we?" "The biggest." He kissed her then, a kiss that tasted of forgiveness and new beginnings, of overcome mistakes and renewed promises. The setting sun bathed them in its golden light, and the jasmine in the courtyard released its fragrance, as if also celebrating the reunion. "So, what now?" Emily asked when they finally separated. "Now we build something together, without rushing, without demands, without impossible expectations. You finish your degree, I manage my business from here, and we see where the road takes us. Sounds too easy. It won't be. There will be obstacles, arguments, moments when we'll want to kill each other, but if we face them together, I think we can handle anything. Emily rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. There's one more thing I need to tell you, she murmured. Something I've been keeping for weeks. What? I love you. I hadn't said it before because I was afraid, but I'm tired of being afraid. I love you, James Harrington, with all your flaws and virtues, with your complicated world and your heart of gold. He held her tighter, as if fearing she would disappear. And I love you, Emily Watson, more than words can express. They remained embraced until the stars began appearing in the sky, and the night's cold forced them to seek shelter inside the winery. But they knew that, whatever happened, they would no longer have to face the cold alone. The months that followed were a constant exercise in balance. Emily continued her studies with renewed determination, while James reorganized his business to spend more time in Napa Valley. They had found a rhythm that worked, a dance of compromises and concessions that kept them together without suffocating their individualities. But life rarely allows happiness to flow without interruptions. The first blow came in the form of a phone call in mid-August. Grandmother Margaret had suffered a heart attack while working in the garden. Neighbors found her unconscious among the rose bushes, pruning shears still in her hand. Emily received the news in the middle of a pharmacology class. She ran out of the classroom without explanation, driven by the panic that only comes from the fear of losing those you love most. The journey to the county hospital was a blur of tears and silent prayers. When she arrived, her mother was already in the waiting room, her face drawn with worry. "How is she?" Emily asked, embracing her. "Stable. The doctors say we got here in time, but she needs surgery, a complicated operation to clear the arteries, and the hospital here doesn't have the resources to do it. Then we transfer her to Davis, to San Francisco, wherever necessary." "Honey, we don't have—" Her mother left the sentence unfinished, but Emily understood perfectly. They didn't have the money. Heart surgeries of that magnitude cost fortunes their family didn't possess, insurance they couldn't afford, resources that had always been beyond their reach. James arrived an hour later, alerted by a message Emily barely remembered sending. He found her sitting on a hallway bench, head in her hands and shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He didn't say anything. He simply sat beside her and wrapped her in his arms, offering her a refuge where she could let go without words. "I don't know what to do," she finally whispered. "She's my grandmother, James. She's all I have left of my father, of my childhood, of everything I am. I can't lose her. You won't lose her. We don't have money for the operation. Insurance doesn't cover procedures like this, and public hospitals have waiting lists of months. Months she might not have." James took her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me carefully. Your grandmother will have the best operation with the best surgeons at the best hospital. I'll take care of everything." "I can't accept that." "Emily." "No," she interrupted, pulling away. "I don't want to be the girlfriend who accepts millionaire favors. I don't want to owe anyone my grandmother's life." "Owe me?" James's expression hardened. "Is that how you see this? As a transaction? That's not what I meant." "Then tell me what you meant, because from where I'm standing it seems like you'd rather your grandmother die than accept my help." The words were like a slap. Emily stood motionless, unable to respond. "My family owes yours," James continued, his voice softer but equally firm. 40 years ago, my parents helped your grandmother when she needed it most. Now it's my turn to return that favor. Not as your boyfriend, not as a rich man doing charity, but as someone who recognizes a debt of honor. James, let me do this, Emily. Please. Not for you, but for her. For Margaret, who saved my family decades ago when no one else would help. Emily closed her eyes, tears overflowing down her cheeks. The pride that had sustained her throughout her life crumbled before the most basic reality. There were things more important than dignity. "Okay," she whispered. "But don't ask me to thank you. I can't yet. I'm not asking for anything, just let me help." That night, while James made calls and organized transfers, Emily remained by her grandmother's bedside. The elderly woman was connected to monitors that beeped rhythmically, her face pale but serene under the hospital's fluorescent lights. "Forgive me, Grandma," she whispered, taking her cold hand in hers. "Forgive me for not being able to take care of you like you took care of me." "There's nothing to forgive," Margaret responded, surprising her with her weak but conscious voice. "You're here. That's all that matters. How long have you been awake?" "Long enough to hear your argument with that boy." Emily lowered her gaze, embarrassed. "You're too proud, girl, just like your grandfather Robert. It's all I have." "No, treasure. You have much more. You have love, you have family. You have someone willing to cross the world for you. Pride is important, but not at the cost of everything else." Margaret squeezed her granddaughter's hand with surprising strength for someone in her condition. "Let yourself be loved, Emily. That's the greatest act of courage that exists." The surgery was scheduled for 3 days later at one of the best hospitals in San Francisco. James organized the helicopter transfer, hired a team of internationally renowned cardiologists, and reserved a suite at the hospital so Emily and her mother could stay close during recovery. All of this should have relieved Emily. Instead, each gesture of generosity was like salt on the wound of her pride. She felt small, inadequate, trapped in a debt she could never repay. And in some dark corner of her mind, Catherine Harrington's voice whispered, "See? I knew sooner or later you'd show your true colors. Everyone has a price." But Emily knew that voice was lying. She hadn't asked for any of this. She hadn't planned to fall in love with a rich man, or for her grandmother to get sick, or to find herself in a situation where money marked the difference between life and death. Fate, it seemed, had a very twisted sense of humor. The corridors of the San Francisco hospital would become, during the following weeks, the scene of the deepest transformation Emily had ever experienced. Grandmother Margaret's surgery lasted 7 hours. 7 hours during which Emily walked from one end of the waiting room to the other, unable to sit, unable to eat, unable to think about anything but the battered heart of the woman who had raised her. James remained by her side every minute. He didn't try to comfort her with empty words or pressure her to eat or rest. He was simply there, a silent and constant presence that she didn't know she needed until she had it. "Why do you do this?" she asked at some point in the early morning, when exhaustion was beginning to take its toll on her ability to reason. "Because I love you." "This isn't love. This is madness. You've spent days sleeping in hospital chairs, cancelling meetings, letting your empire run itself while you wait for news about your girlfriend's grandmother. My empire can wait. You can't." Emily broke down then, in the middle of that sterile waiting room, surrounded by strangers facing their own tragedies. She cried as she hadn't cried since her father's death, with sobs that shook her entire body, and tears that seemed to have no end. James held her through it all. He cradled her against his chest, while she screamed her frustration, her fear, her rage against a universe that seemed determined to snatch everything she loved. And when she finally ran out of tears, he helped her stand, wiped her face with a crumpled tissue, and said, "Whatever happens, you're not alone. You'll never be alone again." The surgery was a success. The chief surgeon came out at 3 in the morning, with a tired but satisfied expression, announcing that Margaret had survived the procedure and that recovery prospects were good. Emily wouldn't remember later what she did exactly at that moment. Her mother would tell her that she had jumped on the doctor in a hug that almost knocked him down, and that she had laughed and cried simultaneously for several minutes. All she would remember was the sensation of absolute relief, as if someone had removed a weight of tons from her shoulders. The weeks of recovery were long and difficult. Margaret had the spirit of a fighter, but her body needed time to heal. Emily divided herself between the hospital, where she spent nights watching over her grandmother's sleep, and the university, where she tried not to miss too many classes. James organized his life around her. He rented an apartment near the hospital so she'd have a place to rest. He hired a specialized nurse for shifts Emily couldn't cover. He made sure she never lacked hot food or clean clothes or words of encouragement. But he also did something else, something Emily wouldn't discover until weeks later. He spoke with her professors, explaining the situation, ensuring that her absences wouldn't irreparably affect her academic record. "You didn't have to do that," she told him when she finally found out. "I can handle my own affairs." "I know, but I wanted to. Not to control you, but to support you." "What's the difference?" "The difference is that I never asked your permission to do it, but I also didn't hide anything from you. I did it because I love you and because I saw you were suffering. If that bothers you, I'm sorry. But I don't regret it. Emily looked at him for a long moment, trying to find the argument that would allow her to be angry. She didn't find it. You're destroying all my defenses, she murmured. One by one. Good. Those defenses were hurting you. It was on one of those nights in the hospital, while Margaret slept and Emily kept watch in a chair beside her bed, when she finally understood what James had meant. She had spent her entire life building walls. Walls against poverty, against rejection, against the pain of not being enough. Those walls had protected her, yes, but they had also isolated her. They had turned her into an impregnable fortress where no one could enter, and where she herself felt like a prisoner. James, with his infinite patience and unconditional love, was tearing down those walls stone by stone. And for the first time in her life, Emily began to wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, being vulnerable wasn't the same as being weak. That night she wrote in a notebook she had carried since adolescence, "I thought being strong meant not needing anyone. Now, I understand that true strength lies in knowing how to ask for help, in letting others carry you when the weight is too great. It's not giving up, it's trusting. And trusting, though terrifying, is also the purest form of love." When Grandmother Margaret finally received discharge, 3 weeks after the surgery, Emily was a different person. Not because she had changed her values or her dreams, but because she had learned she could pursue them without sacrificing love in the process. And that lesson, more than any medical treatment, was what saved not only her grandmother, but also herself. Spring arrived in Napa Valley with its usual explosion of colors. The vines, which had remained dormant during winter, began to sprout with a tender green that promised good harvests. Cherry trees bloomed along the edges of roads, painting the landscape white and pink, and the air smelled of fertile earth and renewed hope. Margaret was recovering in the family home, surrounded by the care of her daughter and granddaughter, and the frequent visits from James, who had acquired the habit of appearing on weekends with baskets full of delicacies from his wineries. "That boy is going to make me fat," Margaret protested, though she always accepted the artisan cheeses and homemade pastries with evident satisfaction. It was on one of those April afternoons, while Emily studied for her final exams in the house's garden, when an unfamiliar car stopped in front of the gate. The vehicle was elegant but discreet, and from it descended a figure Emily recognized instantly, Catherine Harrington. Her heart stopped for a second. The last time she had seen Catherine had been marked by hostility and humiliation. She couldn't imagine what brought her now to her doorstep. "Emily," Catherine greeted, her voice devoid of the coldness she remembered. "Can we talk?" "About what?" "About many things, but mainly about apologizing." Emily left her textbook on the garden table, unable to hide her surprise. "Come in. My grandmother is resting, but we can talk out here." They sat on the stone bench under the old oak tree that dominated the garden. Catherine dressed more casually than Emily had ever seen her. Linen pants, a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a low ponytail. She seemed human. "I don't know where to start," Catherine admitted, wringing her hands in her lap with a gesture Emily recognized as genuine nervousness. "The beginning is usually a good place." Catherine sketched a sad smile. "I treated you unfairly. From the first moment I knew of your existence, I decided you were a threat. Not because there was something wrong with you, but because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of losing my brother." Catherine raised her gaze, and Emily saw in her eyes a vulnerability she never would have expected. "James has always been the favorite. The brilliant one, the successful one, the one my parents adored without reservation. I've always been the difficult sister, the one who was never good enough, who compensated for her insecurities by being cruel to others." "Catherine, let me finish, please. I need to say this." Emily nodded, remaining silent. "When James met you, he changed. Overnight he stopped talking only about business and started talking about you, about your eyes, your laugh, the way you made him see the world differently. And instead of being happy for him, I felt panic. I thought you were taking away the only person I had left in this family. But James loves you, he's never stopped. I know that now. But then I was blinded by my own demons." Catherine took a tissue from her pocket and dabbed her eyes, which had begun to moisten. "A month ago, my daughter Sophia had a crisis. She's 17, and has been struggling with anxiety and depression for months. One night I found her locked in the bathroom crying because she felt she would never be enough for anyone. Emily felt her heart constrict. I'm so sorry. That night, while I held my daughter and listened to her talk about her fears, I realized I was reproducing the same patterns that had made me unhappy. I was teaching Sophia that a person's value depends on their status, their money, their last name. I was transmitting to her the same poison that had been transmitted to me. How is she now? Better. We started family therapy, and we're working together to change things. But part of that work brought me here. I needed to face the harm I'd caused, starting with you. Catherine took Emily's hands in hers, a gesture so unexpected that Emily didn't know how to react. I judged you without knowing you. I humiliated you in public. I tried to destroy something beautiful because I was afraid of my own shortcomings. There's no excuse for what I did, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, deeply. Emily remained silent for a long moment. Catherine's words resonated with a sincerity that was impossible to fake, and although the pain from that night at the Legion of Honor still stung, she knew that clinging to resentment would only hurt herself. I forgive you, she finally said, not because you deserve it, but because I need to free myself from that burden. Catherine let out a trembling sigh. Thank you. I don't know if I deserve it, but I appreciate it with all my heart. Can I ask you something? Anything. Take care of Sophia. Don't let her grow up thinking she has to be perfect to be loved. Teach her that her value doesn't depend on what the world thinks of her. Catherine nodded, tears running freely down her cheeks. I will. I promise. When Catherine left an hour later, Emily remained sitting in the garden, processing what had just happened. Grandmother Margaret, who apparently hadn't been as asleep as she'd pretended, came out to join her. Are you okay, girl? I think so. It's just that I never expected this. Life has strange ways of surprising us. Sometimes the greatest enemies become the most unexpected allies. Do you think she really changed? I think pain has the power to transform us, for better or worse. The difference lies in what we do with it. Emily rested her head on her grandmother's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender that had always accompanied her. I love you, Grandma, and I love you, Treasure. More than words can express. Summer brought with it final exams and the culmination of years of effort. Emily faced each test with a determination forged in the fire of all the difficulties she had overcome. The sleepless nights studying, the exhausting hospital shifts, the personal and family sacrifices. Everything converged in those decisive weeks. James respected her need for concentration, limiting his visits and communications so as not to distract her. But every night, without fail, he sent her a message that became their farewell ritual. I go slowly, because I go far, and I go with you. The phrase, which had emerged spontaneously in one of their first conversations, had become their shared mantra, a promise of patience, of constancy, of love that knew no rush because it knew it had all eternity ahead. The day Emily received her exam results, James was waiting at Maggie's coffee house. She entered like a whirlwind, the official envelope still sealed in her trembling hands. I can't open it, she confessed, dropping into the chair across from him. I'm terrified. Why? Because if I failed, I'll have wasted years of my life. And if you passed what? Then everything will be real. I'll be a real nurse. And the responsibility of that crushes me. James took the envelope from her hands and placed it on the table between them. Open it. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Emily took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a second, and tore open the envelope. She unfolded the paper with clumsy fingers, her eyes scanning the lines of text until she found what she was looking for. I passed, she whispered. I passed everything, with honors in 3 subjects. The shout of joy that followed made all the coffee shop's patrons turn toward them. Maggie, from behind the counter, applauded enthusiastically. James lifted her from the chair and spun her in the air, laughing with a happiness that was as much hers as his. I knew you'd do it. I knew you were extraordinary. I'm a nurse, officially. The celebrations lasted for days. There was an impromptu party at Grandmother Margaret's house, with all the neighbors contributing homemade dishes and bottles of the region's best wine. There was an elegant dinner in Carmel, organized by James at a restaurant overlooking the ocean. There were congratulatory calls from distant relatives, childhood friends, classmates. But the most significant moment came a week later, when Emily received her first job offer, a position in the palliative care unit at UC Davis Medical Center, the same hospital where she had done her internships, where she had learned that medicine wasn't just about healing bodies, but also accompanying souls. "It's perfect," she told James, as they reviewed the contract terms together. "Exactly what I always dreamed of. Are you happy?" "More than happy. I'm complete." James looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "May I ask you something?" "Always. What comes next? For us, I mean." Emily left the contract on the table and turned to him. "What do you want to come next?" "I want everything," he responded without hesitation. "I want to wake up every morning by your side. I want to build a life with you, a home, a family. I want to grow old watching you change and grow, and I want you to see the same in me." "James, I'm not asking you to decide now. I just wanted you to know how I feel, what I've always felt since that night in the winery courtyard." Emily took his face in her hands, looking directly into his eyes. "I want everything too," she said, "but I want to do it right, without rushing, without pressure, without skipping stages, because others expect us to. Then we'll do it at your pace." "I go slowly, remember?" "I remember." She kissed him with the tenderness of someone who knows they have all the time in the world. Outside the window, the summer sun painted the roofs of Napa in golden tones, and somewhere nearby, a church bell marked the hour with its ancestral tolling. It was the beginning of a new chapter, and Emily was ready to write it. The following autumn found Emily established in her new job, developing the skills she had cultivated during years of study and practice. The palliative care unit was a place of contrasts. There was pain and hope, farewells and reconciliations, bitter tears and unexpected laughter. She learned to hold hands in final moments, to offer comfort when words seemed insufficient, to find meaning in each small gesture of humanity. Her patients adored her, her colleagues respected her, and her supervisors were beginning to see her as a promise for the future. James, meanwhile, had transformed his way of managing business. Following the model they had discussed during countless nighttime conversations, he created a foundation dedicated to offering scholarships to young people from rural communities who wanted to study healthcare careers. He called it the Margaret Foundation, in honor of the woman who had inspired both its creation and purpose. "You didn't have to do that," Emily told him when he presented her with the official bylaws. "I wanted to. Your grandmother taught me that debts of gratitude aren't paid, they're multiplied." The foundation's official inauguration coincided with the first harvest Emily could witness in full at James's winery. For years, her schedules as a student and worker had prevented her from participating in the ancestral ritual that marked the pulse of Napa Valley. Now, finally, she could experience it firsthand. Workers arrived at dawn, when dew still glistened on the vine leaves. They worked in orderly rows, their expert hands selecting the best clusters with a delicacy that belied the hardness of the labor. The air smelled of ripe grapes, of turned earth, of honest sweat. Emily joined them, ignoring James's protests about the heat and physical effort. She wanted to feel what generations of her family had felt, the visceral connection with the land that produced the wine that had defined her region's identity. At the end of the day, with hands stained with must and aching muscles, she sat beside James on the winery's porch, contemplating the sun sinking behind the hills. "Now I understand why your family never sold these lands," he said. "It's not just a business. It's a legacy." "It is. Every vine has a story. Every harvest is a new chapter in a book that began centuries ago. Do you miss not being able to dedicate yourself to this?" Emily thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But then I remember why I chose another path. The vineyards will always be here, cared for by those who love them. I have another kind of harvest to tend." "Which one?" "People. Their lives, their stories, their moments of vulnerability. Every patient I care for is like a vine that needs attention to give its best." James wrapped his arm around her, drawing her to him. "You're incredible, you know that? You remind me pretty often, because I'm afraid you'll forget." They remained like that until stars began appearing in the purple sky. Somewhere in the winery, workers sang traditional songs while processing the day's last load. The aroma of young wine mixed with the perfume of the countryside, creating an olfactory symphony that Emily would keep in her memory forever. "You know what I thought the first time I saw you?" James asked suddenly. "That I was a clumsy server who almost ruined your party. I thought, this woman has something all the others have lost. I didn't know what it was then, but now I do." "And what is it?" "Authenticity. You're exactly who you appear to be, without masks or pretensions. In a world full of people pretending to be what they're not, you're like a glass of fresh water in the middle of the desert." Emily felt her eyes moisten. "James, let me finish. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who wanted me for what I had, not for who I was. Investors who smiled while calculating how to profit from me. Women who saw in my last name a springboard to the life they desired. Supposed friends who disappeared when things got difficult. And then you appeared. A country girl who didn't know who I was, who didn't care about my money, who looked at me as if I were simply a man, with flaws and virtues, deserving of love or rejection according to my actions, not according to my bank account." "It wasn't that simple," Emily admitted. "At first I had my doubts too. I wondered if I was being naive, if you were playing with me. I know, and you had every right to doubt. But you stayed. Despite the fear, despite the voices telling you to run, you stayed and gave me the chance to prove who I really am. And you did. Every day, with every gesture, with every decision. You proved to me that true love exists, even if it comes wrapped in complicated circumstances." James took something from his jacket pocket. It was a small velvet box that Emily recognized instantly. Her heart raced. "Before you say anything," he hurried to say, "this isn't what it seems." He opened the box, revealing not a ring but an antique wrought-iron key. "It's the key to the century-old cellar," he explained. "The one that holds my family's oldest wines, the ones reserved for the most special occasions." "I don't understand. I want this key to be yours, not as a gift, but as a symbol. That my roots are your roots, that my history is your history. That whatever you do, whatever you decide, you'll always have a place here." Emily took the key with trembling hands. The metal was cold against her skin, but the meaning it contained warmed her from within. "James, it's my way of telling you I'm in no hurry, that I can wait as long as you need. That when you're ready, if you're ever ready, to take the next step, I'll be here." She kissed him with all the love she felt, with all the gratitude she didn't know how to express with words. And in that kiss was a silent promise, a commitment that didn't need rings or ceremonies to be real. The roots that united them were deeper than any tradition, and the wings their love gave them were stronger than any obstacle. 1 year later, the century-old cellar of the Harrington family held silence, a sacred, reverent silence, like that which precedes life-changing moments. The century-old oak barrels rested on their stone shelves, breathing the wine aging within them. The air was permeated with ancestral aromas, wood, tannins, crystallized time. Emily walked between the corridors with the wrought-iron key hanging from her neck. James guided her with a gentle hand on her back, stopping occasionally to explain the history of each vintage, the meaning of each harvest. "This barrel is from the year I was born," he pointed out. "My father reserved it to open at my wedding." Emily tensed slightly, but James didn't seem to notice. "And this one," he continued, pointing to another smaller barrel, almost hidden in a corner, "is special. It's from the year you were born. How is that possible?" "My father was friends with your grandmother, remember? When Margaret wrote to tell them a girl had been born in the family, my father reserved a barrel in her honor. He said someday it would have meaning." Emily felt tears threatening to overflow. "Your father did that for a girl he didn't even know?" "My father believed in invisible bonds. He said families aren't chosen only by blood but by affection. And that wine, like love, needs time to reach its fullness." They stopped before an antique wooden door, closed with a lock oxidized by time. "This is the private chamber," James explained. "Only family members have access. It holds the most valuable wines, those reserved for life's most important moments." "Why are you bringing me here?" James took her hands in his, looking at her with an intensity that made her hold her breath. "Because I want you to be part of this. Not as a guest, not as a girlfriend, but as family." "James, wait. Before you say anything, I need to tell you something." He led her to a stone bench beside the closed door. They sat facing each other, knees almost touching, candlelight projecting dancing shadows on the walls. 6 months ago, he began, when I was in San Francisco for a business meeting, I received an unexpected visit. It was my father, who had flown from Santa Barbara expressly to talk to me. Your father. I thought you barely communicated. That was true, but that visit changed things. My father sat across from me in the same office where we used to discuss business strategies and told me something I'll never forget. James paused, as if gathering strength to continue. He told me he'd made the biggest mistake of his life by teaching me that success was measured in numbers, that he'd spent decades building an empire while missing important moments, my first steps, my graduations, my nighttime fears, that when he finally retired and had time to reflect, he realized all the money in the world wasn't worth what he'd sacrificed. Why did he tell you that? Because he wanted to warn me. He said, "Don't make my mistake, James. If you found someone who makes you a better person, who reminds you of what really matters, don't lose her chasing ghosts of success that will never give you happiness." Emily felt her heart beating so hard she feared he could hear it. "And what did you say?" "I told him about you, about how you'd taught me to appreciate the small things, about how you'd challenged everything I thought I knew about love and relationships, about how for the first time in my life I felt complete. James, my father cried. I'd never seen him cry, not even when my grandfather died. But that day he cried, and he told me he was proud of me. Not for the wineries, not for the money, but for having the courage to choose love over ambition." Tears now ran freely down Emily's face. "Why are you telling me this now?" James knelt before her, taking her hands with infinite tenderness. "Because I want to ask you something, not with grand words or ostentatious gestures, just with the truth of what I feel." He took from his pocket a small velvet pouch. From it, he extracted not a diamond ring, but a miniature grapevine cutting, with roots extending like fingers searching for earth to anchor in. "This is a cutting from your family's vineyard," he explained. "I borrowed it from your grandmother months ago, without you knowing. I want to plant it in your house's garden beside your mother's, where it can grow and bear fruit for generations." "I don't understand." "Emily Watson, I'm not asking you to marry me today, or tomorrow, or at any specific moment. I'm asking you for something more difficult and simpler at the same time. I'm asking you to let me be part of your life, of your family, of your roots. I'm asking that we let our love grow like this vine, slowly, with patience, without hurry but with direction. And when we're ready, when we've built the foundations of something true and unshakable, then I'll ask you the question I've been keeping in my heart since that night in the courtyard. But until then, I just want this, your hand in mine, your life intertwined with mine, your heart beating beside mine." Emily looked at him for a long moment, feeling that all the pieces of her life finally fit together. The pain of the past, the struggles of the present, the dreams of the future, everything converged in this instant, in this man kneeling before her with a grapevine cutting in his hands and his heart on his lips. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. She embraced him then, in that century-old cellar where generations of stories had fermented like the finest wine. The candles flickered, the barrels seemed to sigh with satisfaction, and somewhere in the universe, two destinies that had always been intertwined finally recognized each other. There was no ring that night, no formal proposal or established date. Only two people who had found in each other what they'd been searching for their entire lives, and who had learned that true love doesn't need guarantees because it's demonstrated every day, with each choice, with each sacrifice. When they left the cellar, the sky was full of stars. Emily carried the vine cutting in her hands as if it were the most valuable treasure in the world, and perhaps it was. Because in those tiny roots pulsed the promise of a future they would write together, word by word, day by day, harvest after harvest. 3 years later, Emily's dress had been made with lace from her great-grandmother's wedding gown. The expert hands of a local seamstress had adapted the century-old design to her figure, preserving each original stitch while creating something new. It was the perfect metaphor for her life, honoring the past while building the future. The ceremony was held outdoors, in the courtyard of St. Helena's Chapel, surrounded by the vineyards that had been witnesses to their entire story. The March sun painted the landscape in golden tones, and the air carried the aroma of ripe grapes, ready for the harvest that would begin the following week. The guests were a perfect mixture of two worlds. On one side, Emily's country neighbors, in their best Sunday clothes and faces, weathered by outdoor work. On the other, businessmen and James's partners, some of whom had flown from distant continents to witness the moment. Catherine was in the front row, with her daughter Sophia, now a 20-year-old studying psychology in Berkeley, seated beside her. The relationship between the sisters-in-law had flourished in unexpected ways. They spent entire afternoons talking about books, about dreams, about wounds that had healed and scars that remained. Catherine had become a fierce defender of Emily, correcting anyone who dared repeat the old rumors. Grandmother Margaret occupied the place of honor, seated in a chair James had specially brought for her, cushioned with ergonomic backrest, designed to accommodate the pains that age had accumulated in her bones. At 81 years old, her eyes still shone with the same keenness as always, though now they moistened more easily. "She looks beautiful," she whispered to her daughter, Emily's mother, as they watched the bride walk down the improvised aisle between the rows of chairs. "She does. And happy. Look at her." And it was true. Emily radiated a happiness that needed no adornments or artifice. She walked with the confidence of someone who knows exactly where she wants to be, each step an affirmation of the decisions that had brought her to that moment. James waited for her at the altar, dressed in a dark grey suit that brought out the white of his shirt. The years had added some grey hairs to his temples, but also a serenity he hadn't possessed before. He was no longer the businessman obsessed with success he had been. He was a man who had learned to balance ambition and love, work and life, roots and wings. When Emily reached his side, he took her hands with the same delicacy as that first night, when he had held her to keep her from falling. "You look beautiful," he whispered. "You're shaking," she responded with a smile. "I've been waiting 3 years for this moment. I think I have a right to be nervous." The ceremony was simple but moving. There were no grandiose speeches or ostentatious rituals. Just two people pronouncing vows they had written together, words born from shared experiences and dreams built in common. "I promise," James said, "to love you in wealth and in poverty, though I hope we never have to test the latter. I promise to respect you when we agree and especially when we don't. I promise to be your partner, your accomplice, your refuge in storms, and your celebration in victories. And I promise to go slowly, always slowly, because loves that are worthwhile have no hurry. I promise," Emily responded, "to love you for who you are, not for what you have. I promise to remind you of small things when the world pushes you toward big ones. I promise to care for you when you're sick, celebrate you when you triumph, and hold you when you fall. And I promise that no matter what the future brings, we'll face each day together, as partners, as friends, as lovers." When they exchanged rings, simple gold bands without ostentation, a gust of wind stirred the leaves of the surrounding vines, as if the very earth wanted to applaud. The banquet mixed the sophistication of Carmel's best chefs with homemade recipes passed down through generations. Prime rib was served alongside contemporary culinary creations. Grandmother Margaret's pot roast, prepared according to a century-old recipe, was the indisputable star of the menu. The toasts continued for hours. Catherine spoke of second chances and siblings who teach more than they imagine. Emily's mother remembered her late husband and thanked God that her daughter had found a love he would have approved of. James's parents, arrived from Santa Barbara for the occasion, spoke of circles that close and destinies that are fulfilled. But it was Grandmother Margaret who pronounced the words that would be engraved in everyone's memory. She stood with the help of her cane, refusing the assistance several arms offered her. Her voice was weak but clear, strengthened by decades of speaking truths without adornment. 40 years ago, she began, when I was young and the world seemed determined to destroy me, 2 people extended their hand without asking anything in return. They didn't know me, they owed me nothing, but they saw someone who needed help and they acted. That gesture of generosity planted a seed that took decades to bloom. Today, seeing my granddaughter marry the son of those people, I understand that the universe has mysterious ways of returning what we give. Emily Treasure, you've been my greatest joy since the day you were born. I watched you grow, struggle, fall, and rise. I watched you become the extraordinary woman you are, and I never stopped marveling at your strength, your kindness, and your capacity to love. James, young man, thank you for seeing in my granddaughter what she's worth. Thank you for waiting when she needed time, for yielding when she needed space, for loving her the way she deserves to be loved. To both of you I say, love isn't a destination, it's a journey. There will be sunny days and stormy days, moments of joy and moments of doubt. But as long as you walk together, as long as you remind each other why you chose this shared life, no obstacle will be insurmountable. I toast to you, to the roots that sustain you and the wings that lift you, to the past that connects you and the future that awaits you. To love that, like good wine, only improves with time. Glasses raised in unison, and the tinkling of crystal mixed with applause and tears of emotion. When the party ended and the last guests left, Emily and James walked alone among the vineyards. The full moon illuminated the landscape with its silver light, and the night silence enveloped everything with its mantle of peace. They stopped beside a vine that stood out among the others, smaller, younger, with a blue ribbon tied to its trunk. "Do you remember?" James asked. "It's the cutting you gave me that night in the cellar. We planted it together 2 years ago. Look how much it's grown." Emily knelt beside the plant, caressing the leaves that gleamed under the moonlight. "Next year it'll bear its first fruit," she said. "The winemaker says it'll be a special wine. Like everything we've built." They sat together on the earth, ignoring the elegant dresses and expensive shoes. In that moment, they weren't the millionaire businessman and the country nurse. They were simply two people who loved each other, surrounded by the vineyards that had been witnesses to their story. "What are you thinking?" James asked. "About how far we've come. That night at the winery, when I almost spilled glasses on your guests, I never imagined we'd end up here." "I did." "Really? From the moment I saw you, I knew my life was about to change. I didn't know how or when, but I felt it, as if the universe was whispering to me to pay attention, that something important was happening." Emily rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar aroma of his cologne mixed with the perfume of ripe grapes. "Do you think we'll be happy?" she asked. "I think we already are, and I think we'll continue to be. Not because fate dictates it, but because every day we'll choose to be." "I go slowly," she murmured. "Because you go far," he completed, "and I go with you." The kiss they shared under the moonlight contained all the promises in the world, promises of love and respect, of patience and passion, of deep roots and bold flights. Because they had learned the most important lesson, that true loves aren't the ones that arrive without effort, but those built day by day, with each conscious decision to choose the other. That differences in origin, education, economic resources are merely obstacles that genuine love can overcome, and that the most valuable fortunes aren't measured in bank accounts, but in soul connections that transcend time and circumstances. Emily Watson and James Harrington walked back toward the winery hand in hand, leaving behind the vineyards that held their history and walking toward the future they would write together. A future that, like Napa Valley's finest wine, would only improve with the years. Sometimes the clumsiest stumbles are the beginning of the most beautiful paths, and the loves that seem impossible turn out to be the only ones truly worth it.